Good morning. My name is Salima, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA APM Global User Community Webcast conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I will now turn today's conference call over to Mr. Hiko Davis. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Selena. Hi, my name is Hiko Davis. I'm the community president for the APM Global Community. I just have a couple of brief announcements to make before we start our morning presentation. We have listed on the community 3 additional presentations that we'll be doing over the next few months, planning out for the year. We have a presentation scheduled for September 20th, which will be a presentation on the ET agent. It will be done by myself, Keith Palmer, who's another community president, and Chris Klein from CA. On October 18th, we're going to have a presentation for Andreas Rafe on the APM Studio and the name formatted. And on November 15th, which will be our last presentation for the year about the APM Cloud Monitor. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Andrew Yeung, who's from the product management team of APM. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you, Hiko. Good morning, good afternoon, and possibly good evening to everyone. My name is Andrew Yeung. I am one of the product managers on the APM team. And Hiko, based on some of the remaining webcasts for the year, they definitely sound like very interesting topics for this group. So we're really glad to see the group flourishing with the type of content that you guys are actually talking about. What I'm actually here to talk about today is some of the enhancements that we've done to APM 9.1 and subsequently to APM 9.1.1. And this is somewhat interesting because I believe a few months ago, possibly four months ago or so, there was an overview and presentation of most of the marquee features of APM 9.1, but we never really got down to having an opportunity to talk to some of the smaller but notable customer enhancements. So I'm going to be talking about that today. But the deck that I have is actually fairly full, so I do anticipate we will use up the full hour. If we start running short on time, there might be a few things that I might skip out. I might skip out on the demo or so. But obviously, we can certainly communicate over the community threads and so on. So now, as I mentioned, we did talk about the marquee features previously within this community. I will spend just a couple of minutes just to recap some of those things before I start jumping into the other customer enhancements within 9.1. And timing-wise, because it has been a few months that we've actually talked about 9.1 after it was released, we have actually subsequently a service pack release we call 9.1.1. And this is actually an enhancements-based service pack. So there were actually some enhancements added to 9.1.1, mainly around the integrations with APM Cloud Monitor and CA Lisa. So I'm going to talk about some of that as well, and hopefully I'll have time to show some demos of those integrations as well. So, and then before we end, I do want to talk about some notable patches. If customers are considering moving to 9.1 and 9.1.1, we do have some patches that we recommend, and those are going to be coming out on the horizon fairly soon. So I will talk a little bit about that towards the end. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. So what's new in APM 9.1? For those of you who are not on 9.1 yet, this is possibly new information to you, but for those of you who are already on 9.1, it's likely not new information. So we focused on three main areas of when we were working on APM 9.1. And just to recap, these are around the areas of smart triage, simple APM, and broadening our coverage. within Smart Triage, those are a couple of our marquee features that we actually talked about previously. One is the infrastructure visibility, to be able to really get down to details about the network and the physical or virtual systems in the data center to understand and correlate information about those two application performance that you're actually monitoring. So you'll be able to visualize infrastructure dependencies in the Application Triage Map, including physical servers, the virtualization layer, the databases, and we also introduced this location map that provides a view of the correlation of these servers to the supporting applications of the agents that are sitting on it. And as health information in the form of events from those infrastructure solutions are actually detected, those will be populated into APM so that you can actually see those events in context while you're triaging application issues. Around the same token, from a network side, Tim Smith and Zach Belcher several months ago showed you some pretty extensive capabilities around that side to actually be able to triage down to the network, be able to drill down from defective business transactions down to a network session analysis and network packets to be able to perform problem triage and diagnosis if you believe the problem is actually down in the network side of things. And there's also integration with our application delivery analysis and also integration of our metrics going into the CA Performance Center. So those are the main things in terms of the marquee capabilities that were added in APM 9.1. A few other things that are on this slide, around the triage map and the APM cluster usability enhancements, some of the other manageability, end user monitoring enhancements. I'll get to most of these today in our discussion with the notable customer enhancements. So that's really the crux of the first half of this particular session. Okay? So let's go ahead and dive in to the actual list of customer enhancements. I don't know how some of the other community presentations have actually been, but I'll apologize in advance if some of the slides here are a little dry, but I'll try to add a little color to this when I get an opportunity to do a few demos here and there. So the first set of enhancements that I want to talk about is around the Application Triage Map, and I didn't actually have an opportunity to put up a poll on this live meeting session, but it's always good to get an understanding of how many customers out there are actually using the Application Triage Map, because we believe this visualization is where we actually want to go, and we want more and more users to have a starting point of the triage capabilities in this Application Triage Map. So we introduced this Triage Map back in APM 9, and we're steadily, release over release, adding enhancements to it to improve coverage around the Triage Map as well as the usability of the Triage Map. So we've done some improvements around that area in APM 9.1. In our follow-on releases with APM Sierra, some of you are on our customer validation program. We're continuing to add capabilities to that area. So as you guys are starting to take a look at the capabilities in this triage map, it'll be good to get that feedback and see what else do you feel like will be useful on that particular visualization. So in terms of what we actually provided or improved upon in APM 9.1, is we added customer experience metrics. These are the real-time transaction metrics that, when you integrate CEM together with Interscope, those metrics show up on your metric tree, but in a triage perspective, we previously didn't have that visualization to be able to correlate that customer experience, be able to logically describe that on a visualization when compared to the underlying application transactions, the underlying transactions that are being monitored by the Interscope agents. And on top of that, we also added the notion of what we're calling resource metrics. I mentioned a little earlier, we added integration to our infrastructure management solutions so that you can see the correlation between the servers and the network to the application components that you're actually monitoring. Here, it's a little different here. There's a subtle difference here with respect to the resource metrics. Resource metrics are the resources that are supporting the applications that are typically what we gather out of our platform monitors, such as the CPU and memory, and then also in the JVM, things like the thread pools and the JDBC connection pools. And so those are the starting set of resource metrics that we're going to provide some indicators on the visualization as well. So now on the triage map, you can now see front end, back end, the resources that are required to support these front ends and back ends, and then also how the end user, from a customer experience perspective, is actually affected when you're actually monitoring overall application performance. So we do believe we do provide a pretty comprehensive set of visibility out there on that triage map. We've also improved upon the alert builder on the application triage map. You can build alerts directly off of the triage map in a more simpler fashion as opposed to the regular types of alerts that you create through the management modules. And because the triage map is able to pull together a lot of the things dynamically and build the correlations between the different components, a number of customers wanted this as kind of a baseline view that they want to put on a dashboard and then use the dashboard to decorate other things around it to more adequately describe what they actually want to be monitoring. So on our dashboard editors, we've added the capability to add a triage map view onto the dashboards specifically for that. And then the last item is really more around usability. For the triage map charts, when you're monitoring metric trends, it's always good to have some indication of the alert thresholds as you're actually monitoring the trends, and not just see stoplights for those. I'm also the product manager for the .NET agent, so I do want to spend a little bit of time around some of the things that we did to improve the .NET agent in APM 9.1. I think looking back at the abstract for the customer community website, it was a little inaccurate how I kind of described the different bullet points. So we did a number of improvements to the .NET agent. The first thing you'll see here is a list of installer improvements. For those of you who are familiar with a .NET agent, prior to 9.1, we've had problems with the install and deployment of the .NET agent. So I'll be frank up front. We've had some challenges, especially around the setting up the permissions around the .NET agent folder structure as it gets laid down. We've had issues with the later versions of Windows Server, Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2008 R2, to be able to run our version of the Install Anywhere installer on those platforms. So we rewrote the installation for the .NET agent in Install Shield, which has much better support around that area, and you don't have to mess around with manually loading the agent into the GAC, et cetera. And the permissions are much better handled. We're still delivering this widely permission executable if you want to specify real specific permissions to the folders that the agent needs to access. But overall, by default, as we deploy it, we've set it up in such a way that we believe should have minimal impact. And then we also added dual bit install. So the installer itself, if you install a 64-bit .NET agent, it'll also lay down the bits for a 32-bit agent, so you can monitor 32-bit and 64-bit applications on the same box at the same time. And we also ship a .MSI, which is the Microsoft installer. So if you have a process that leverages the .MSI, you can leverage those as well. On the web services and WCF side, and mainly around the WCF, definitely really simplified the approach for monitoring WCF. They're now regular extensions to the agent, as opposed to previously where they were actually bits that you had to lay down and configure the web.config and machine.config, a lot of very manual XML type changes that were very error prone. So we've removed those dependencies, and we just laid down simple agent extensions to monitor WCF. Improved customers' user experience. Again, this was one of the themes that we wanted to move towards with our next couple of releases. We added dynamic instrumentation for .NET. Java dynamic instrumentation was added. A graphical dynamic instrumentation for Java was added in APM 9. And we've added that for .NET in APM 9.1. There are a couple subtle differences because of some of the limitations with respect to the .NET CLR profiler that we use, but we intend to progress and make improvements around those over time as the underlying API also gets worked up over the various different versions of the CLR. .NET 4 support. We've supported .NET 4 since APM 9.05. Now, the issue there, which is not quite apparent to most customers, is that we were using a backwards compatibility mode to monitor .NET 4, which is okay. You know, Microsoft allows you to do that. In order to actually monitor newer features of .NET 4, however, we re-implemented the agent to leverage the new interfaces in the .NET 4 CLR profiling API. And so we can have much better control of some of the newer objects and capabilities in .NET 4. And to be able to do things like support in-process side-by-side scenarios. So you can have a single process that actually loads multiple versions of the CLR in our agent. We'll be able to understand which version of the CLR you're actually in at the same time as the application is being run. We've done some performance improvements, mainly around two areas. One is around the startup bubble, starting up the agent starting up the application with a .NET agent has been a problem historically with a .NET agent. We've done some significant improvements around there. We will continue to do so over the next few releases if we see other opportunities to streamline that. So we've seen some pretty significant improvements around that area. And then around perfmon, metrics on a Windows box, those are obviously typically box wide, so to speak. But the way in previous versions, we've actually queried out these perfmon agents for perfmon metrics for every instance of an agent, and that actually caused overhead on the box and on the system. So what we've done is we've externalized that to have a single perfmon service that shows it as a single agent across the entire box, so it doesn't have that overhead that impacts other instances of the agent. So that was around .NET. Around manageability of the APM Enterprise Manager cluster, what did we do around that area? We've added the APM Status Console. For those of you who are already on APM 9.1, I don't know if you've actually seen this UI, but it's available just right off of the menu bar at the top of the Interscope workstation. And what it provides is it provides APM administrators a view into their EM clusters. You know, a lot of times customers they have a cluster and they have all these multiple collectors. They don't know the relationships between the servers. They want to understand exactly how the clusters actually look like. So the first thing we provided is a topology visualization of that cluster, and within that cluster, the health status of the individual collectors and whether or not there's problems in the underlying EM. And how do we show these health status indicators is really based on a couple of different things. One is around the events that we that we gather for the Enterprise Manager, so things like the harvest duration, the CPU usage of the Enterprise Manager, the Smart Store access duration, and stuff like that. And then also the clamps. Oftentimes customers ask, well, we know we've set up clamps, but we don't know if the clamps are actually in effect. So the clamp status, if there are actually metrics that are being clamped, the status console will actually show an indication of which clamps have actually breached the threshold, so that administrators would have an idea of what's actually going on at that time. And the way you actually set up the clamps and the events and their corresponding thresholds, those are in this new APM events threshold configuration file that comes with the Enterprise Manager. So that's one thing that you want to take a look at if you want to make sure that you do see the appropriate type of information show up on the APM Status Console. Now, this Status Console is really meant for administrators. So there is a permission that has been set up, the APM Status Console permission, and you want to be able to enable that to be able to see this APM Status Console. And I'll show a screenshot in a bit. We've also added the what we call agent controllability, visibility into agents that have been denied to this set of collectors or the cluster itself. And so within the load balancing.xml, you can have various different agent specifiers, and these are just regular expressions for the agents that you want to either include or exclude from certain collector hosts. So in the example below, you have an indication of, for this particular set of agents that you want to always allow it to connect to, either the CA Wiley 02 or CA Wiley 01 collectors within that cluster. Or you also have the option to exclude from certain collectors if you want to deny them for actually accessing those collectors. And this is to have better control of what's actually connecting to your collector, so that you don't completely overload your collectors and your EM cluster. We've had stories from customers where they call these rogue agents, where they would have, they know there are applications teams out there that have installed agents on their various different systems, typically possibly on a performance testing instance or something like that, and they know there's a collector out there they want to connect to so that they can gather performance information through the Enterprise Manager. And so they would, randomly connect these agents, and they would just show up on these Enterprise Managers, and while they're running a load test, it would actually impact the whole cluster. And the cluster was really meant for production monitoring. So it's a means to have better control around your agents, so that you, as an Enterprise Manager administrator, that you know how best to maintain the sanctity of the cluster that you're actually managing. So that's what we added in terms of agent controllability. Certainly a lot of other areas of improvement that we can do here. So as you guys are actually playing around with it, it'll be good to get some feedback around that area. The APM Status Console, what does it look like? So I put a screenshot up here. This gives you a view on the top left here. This gives you a view of the mom and the different collectors that are actually connected to it. In this case, it's really just two collectors and a mom. If it's got a red indicator, it means there's some sort of event that it has detected, and that could be problematic. And where is that event coming from? It's actually coming from a note about the harvest duration, that it has actually breached a certain threshold that was defined in one of those XML files for the Enterprise Manager. If there are actually clamps that have been occurring there, it'll also show you which particular clamp has breached a particular threshold. In this case, the threshold was set for 500 for this metrics live limit, where in fact the actual current value is over 94,000. So definitely hit that clamp, but it gives the administrator some indication of, hey, what is actually going on, which one's the actual clamp that's having the problem. And then it gives you a list of the agents that you have possibly denied access from this. So it gives you an indication of, hey, yeah, there was a rogue agent that tried to attach to it, or maybe you inadvertently denied access to this particular agent, and maybe you want to make some corrections to that. We also added some additional Java diagnostic tools, with the GC Monitor and a thread dump generator. The GC Monitor, perhaps for a number of you who have used our field pack previously, it may not be completely new to you, but what we have now is a productized version of the GC Monitor, so customers don't need to reach out to global services and actually access that field pack. This GC Monitor is a single extension that does support both Sun and IBM JVMs. So again, you don't need to gather separate field extensions for different JVMs. You can just use a single GC Monitor extension. And it does what you expect it to do in terms of GC. It gathers the garbage collection statistics, the different algorithms that different JVMs use, and it'll help you gather information about the heap as the heap usage as garbage collection is actually performed, so that you can have a better indication of how things are actually being garbage collected in the applications that you're actually monitoring, and if that's actually a possible source of a problem. So it is graphical. You do see metrics show up on the metric browser. There is also a type view that shows an overview of the activity during garbage collection. It's something that does come out of the box, so hopefully some of you guys have already seen it. So you don't actually have to go in and turn it on. For the agents that you deploy for the 9.1 agents that you deploy, they are turned on out of the box. A thread dump generator, in situations where you need to collect a thread dump, there's a deadlock in the application or something like that, you want to be able to understand what are all the different threads that are being processed at that time. Is there any thread that is hung, and how do you actually get that information? Right now, prior to 9.1, you would actually have to go and access that particular box that the application is actually running on. Chances are, if you're in application support, you don't have access to that particular box, or that particular box is all logged down, so you have to call up the administrator, the system administrator of that box, and be able to go and access go and ask the administrator to run a kill 93 command. So the thread dump generator in the box, the thread dump generator in the workstation is the thread dump generator in the workstation it allows you to run a remote command directly from the Interscope workstation. It's a single clickable button, and it'll be able to generate a full thread dump for this entire system or application that you're actually monitoring. So it gives you sufficient information through the thread dump, the thread ID, the state, and the stack trace of that thread dump. You can also save the thread dumps and be able to load previous thread dumps, so you can kind of compare instance over instance, with there's that various different differences between the thread dumps. The one thing to note here that it's actually collecting a thread dump that's providing you a view of that in the Interscope workstation. It's not a portable thread dump, so to speak, that you would actually export out and throw into a thread dump analyzer, so to speak. So we're hoping that we do provide sufficient enough information as you're collecting that thread dump to really help you diagnose a possible problem as you actually see it within the Interscope workstation. And again, we actually do set up permissions to actually access this capability. So there is a thread dump permissions that has been provided with APM 9.1, and you would have to set up that permission for the user to be able to access this capability. CA database performance light integration. I did want to take some time to talk about this integration as well. And this is basically a set of CA, what we call CA Insight DTM. Their agents, they are actually now bundled as part of the APM and Interscope downloads at no additional cost. So the agents themselves that gives us visibility into the performance of the database and the SQL queries. Those are available for APM and Interscope customers without requiring a full CA database performance insight install. And so you can use these agents to monitor your databases from a performance perspective. That's really the key difference here. You want to understand things like top SQL, buffer cache hit ratio. Basically your main database performance metrics. All of those are collected and sent over to APM, and there are a set of out-of-the-box dashboards that help you see what the database performance manager is actually monitoring. If you want to have full administration type and manageability types of capabilities for the database, that would certainly require the full CA database performance management insight. So what we collect is really more from a performance perspective, what we feel is really adequate for correlating database performance to application performance. So the great thing about this also is it extends our visibility into various different databases like Oracle, SQL Server, and database, DB2 and Sybase, and the different platforms that it does support. So it's fairly extensive. So I'll go ahead and switch over to a demo. Again, the content I admit is a little dry. So I'm going to switch and show some of the things that I talked about here so that you can kind of visualize what you're actually looking at. So this is my Interscope workstation. And the first thing I want to do is show you a set of capabilities that we've added to the Application Triage Map. So you'll notice here we've added this customer experience node here. And so this is gives us a visualization of what is potentially impacting the end user. And we gather that through the CEM RTTM metrics that are collected through the integration between CEM and Interscope. So that gives you indication from the end user itself when they're performing activities on that particular transaction. Is there anything from that client perspective that could be actually having a problem? So that's the first little enhancement that we add here. In terms of the resource metric, you can actually turn that on by hitting this button, and you'll now see the set of resource trapezoids, I call them, underneath each of the different front end and back ends. And again, these are resources that gives you an indication of things like platform monitor, CPU, and memory type metrics, as well as the JDBC connection pool and the thread pools that could be affecting performance of your application. And for all these different components, you can set up alerts so that you can have an indication of the health across these different areas. But basically what you have now in this view is a combination of front ends, back ends, and the resources, and also how all these things together could possibly be affecting the business transaction that you're monitoring, as well as ultimately the end user. So it does really cover a lot of different steps within the transaction. So you have a fairly comprehensive view of what's actually going on. And because all these are actually available in the triage map, you can actually go and create alerts, and you can also see if there are actually current alerts and their statuses of those alerts from a triage map perspective. So it's kind of like an instant view after discovery of how your transactions are actually performing. And if you actually want to go in and edit your alerts, it's really easy to right-click and just edit the alert, and it's a very simplistic UI to go and select a metric that you want and enter the threshold value and then enable the alert, all through a single interface. So all of this is, we're hoping to improve all the usability in this one single area so that the triage map has all the capabilities that give you that top-level view that you need to be able to describe and understand performance as you're actually monitoring these transactions within your system. Another thing that I did want to show is on the dashboard itself, because as I mentioned, you have a very simple way to pull up a view of your application topology. You want to be able to suck that data into a dashboard and perhaps decorate it with other types of information on that. So here's an example of a console dashboard where I've actually pulled in this same application triage map view and also decorate different types of information that I want together with that view. But what's really interesting about the triage map view here is that all of the interaction from this menu bar, all of that is actually available for the dashboard view as well. Now let's back to the investigator. I wanted to quickly show the thread dump generator and also the GC monitor. So if you drill down here to this particular agent, you'll now notice that there's a GC monitor node here and a corresponding type view. And under this node, you have all the relevant metrics for the different GC algorithms that you're actually that this particular JVM is actually using, so that you can view the various different trends that are going on within the JVM heap as the garbage collection is actually being performed. The type view gives you an overview of what's going on at a certain point in time, and to be able to see if there's actually a problem that could indicate problems with the underlying memory management of the application that you're actually monitoring. The thread dumps, fairly simple again here to be able to, if you wanted to collect a thread dump, just go into this type view for the thread dumps for that agent and just collect a new thread dump, and it'll immediately issue a remote request to generate that thread dump and all the different running threads at that time and the state that they're actually in. And then there's the additional detail as you drill down to each one and the different breakdown of the running states that they're actually in a graphical view. You can also save the thread dumps and load them from files so that you can compare them and see what's actually going on in between activities that you're actually doing to diagnose an underlying problem. Okay, so those are a quick whirlwind view through a very, very short demo of what we've done to these customer enhancements. I want to quickly switch over to what we've also added to APM 9.1.1. If I switch back to my deck here, I really only have not a whole lot of time left, but I did want to cover most of this in its entirety, so I'm going to go a little fast. There might be some opportunities in a later webcast to talk about this in a little more detail, but I did want to drill down on a couple of things here of what we added in APM 9.1.1. We've had added integration with APM Cloud Monitor and also integration with CA Lisa. And those are the main things that I was going to showcase in the rest of this presentation today. Obviously, there's a list of other enhancements that we've also added and also broaden our coverage across the different platforms within this particular service pack release. But I'm just going to go ahead and dive down into what we've added for these integrations. So for those of you who are not familiar with CA Cloud Monitor, let me just give a very brief introduction of what it is. I know you do have a session coming up towards the end of this year about APM Cloud Monitor, but it basically what it is, it issues synthetics. And it issues synthetics through a global set of monitoring stations. And so it helps you address a number of different use cases. First is to help you solve a 3 a.m. problem. You know, if you have a system and you don't have load on the system at 3 a.m. in the morning, how do you actually know the system is actually up and running and is performing as it's supposed to? It also gives you a global view depending on where the synthetic is actually coming from. You know, it can mock a request coming in from Turkey, for example, and how does that compare to a request coming from China? And so you have some understanding from your end users how their performance actually affected based on the geographic representation. It also helps you manage your vendors' SLAs. And these are primarily if you are dependent on third-party and possibly even cloud-based services, and you don't have a simple means to install an agent in that system, you can use Cloud Monitor and be able to issue synthetics and hit that system through web service requests, et cetera. And then you can gather that information into Interscope to be able to get an understanding of how those third-party services are actually performing. So what we've done with this integration is when we first started with this integration, it was delivered as a field pack. We've now productized this in APM 9.1.1, and so we actually pull metrics in from APM Cloud Monitor, and those metrics are now going to be available in the Interscope Investigator, and so you can actually use these metrics to be able to create your custom dashboards to describe how these synthetic monitor and the resulting metrics, how are those actually performing, and from these dashboards you can do your own correlation to how those impact the transactions that you are monitoring on-premise with your agents that you actually have. All the data that we use to gather to collect from APM Cloud Monitor has a great set of REST-based APIs. They're very, very open. They're very well documented. And so we're able to actually leverage that set of APIs to pull the relevant metrics over to the Interscope Enterprise Manager. The one thing to note is the intervals are different. You know, we collect performance information in Interscope at 15-second intervals. For Cloud Monitor, depending on what you're licensed for and depending on what type of monitor that you're actually deploying on Cloud Monitor, they would be at 1 minute or 5 minute intervals. So the variations of those metrics are certainly different than what you'll see with your traditional Interscope agent metrics. But still, the relevant set of data will be there in the Interscope Manager for you to make sense of it and correlate that with the rest of the Interscope set of data. Going forward, this is a metrics-based integration. Going forward, we do have a grand vision of more tighter integration between Cloud Monitor and Interscope from a transaction perspective. So if you guys start playing around with this capability, we can certainly appreciate some feedback, how you guys also envision tighter, more transactional type of integration between Cloud Monitor and APM. So I'm going to switch over to CA Lisa for a little bit here. For those of you who are not familiar with CA Lisa is the service virtualization solution from ITKO, which we acquired late last year. And so they have a very interesting technology where they can virtualize the different technology dependencies or technology backends that your applications actually are dependent upon. And this is very, very useful in a dev test environment where you do have all these dependencies while you're developing and testing your applications on various other systems like a mainframe or a database or back-end web services or JMS queues or MQ, stuff like that. Stuff that is not very simple to manage, maintain, and bring up to speed directly in dev test because of all the complexity that's involved, of all the cost that's involved. So the service virtualization allows you to mock those systems and to be able to simplify those dependencies, that you virtualize those dependencies as you're actually developing and testing your applications. Now, the power of this is that, first of all, it does remove the dependencies on the system so that you can accelerate the type of activity that you want to perform in dev test. But at the same time, you want to be able to build accurate models when you're actually virtualizing these services. And how do you build as accurate a model as you want? Well, in dev test, if you imagine, what's a typical question that a developer or a QA person typically asks after developing an application is, well, I really want to know what a real user does on a production environment. I'm building this application for bankofamerica.com. It's a mobile application. I know what I need to build in terms of the feature, but in order to model this in a dev and test environment, and especially in a performance QA environment, I want to know the actual characteristics and the usage patterns in production so that I can adequately build a model and to represent that in dev test. So this is where we came up with this notion in talking with our counterparts in CA LISA. We're calling this production data mining. So APM, we understand very well the performance characteristics and the usage characteristics in a production environment. So we want to bring that information into CA LISA so that CA LISA can use that as input to be able to model their virtual services. And so how do we actually do this? We showed a demo of this for those of you who were at CA World late last year. But what we're doing now in the very in these particular releases currently, I would say this is as current as we can get, is that LISA is able to query through APM, a production APM environment, through its web services interface and collect relevant APM performance metrics. So that gives them a snapshot of the performance characteristics of, say, for example, a back-end web service call. And a back-end web service call, say, on a payday. Yesterday was payday, for an online banking application. What's the performance characteristic on a payday on a 2 p.m. on an afternoon, with respect to the transfer account activities. And so they can gather that information by querying our enterprise manager and then surfacing that within LISA to be able to build an accurate model within LISA. And so one of the, I would actually recommend one of the future presentations to the community side be more of a drill down onto CA LISA and how you actually use it. And we can possibly invite someone from the product management team from CA LISA to actually talk about it. But I'll show a few screenshots here. So basically, here's an example of a model of a test case that you actually want to build out. And a typical think time that you want to set up for this web service is usually unknown. And so a QA engineer would probably just insert something that may be completely irrelevant, or it may be a best guess of what they actually feel the web service should actually be performed. But what you can actually do is gather information by going into what we call a VSE for Virtual Service Companion, and select a Wiley data source for that, and be able to select based on a metric path and the actual metric that you actually want, and the duration and the time that you actually want that information from, and then gather that set of performance data and use that as the sync time that you want to model in your virtual service. And so that's really the first thing that we did in the latest version of Lisa. That's Lisa 606. I think they're on 609 now already. But that was the first little piece of integration that we built out because we already had that set of data. It was really simple to get. Going forward, over the next few releases, we're working closely with that team at CA Lisa to not just get this type of performance data, but also get perhaps statistical information or distribution, a representation of a distribution of these performance data, so that you can understand, what's a typical normal distribution of this performance of this web service, or what's the minimum value of this average response time, or the maximum value of this response time. Really gives them different ways to model this particular dependency in a dev test environment. And then even further down, we're going to start talking about tighter integration again from a transactional perspective. You're performing a bill pay on bankofamerica.com. What does that transaction path actually look like in production? And then how do you take that transaction path into a dev test environment and to be able to model that more adequately? So that was the first set of integration that we actually did with CA Lisa. Now, that actually takes APM data into CA Lisa. But what do you do after that? Now, CA Lisa now has created a model that more accurately represents what's going on in production so that you can do better development and testing earlier in the life cycle. But at the same time, we know a lot of our customers actually do use APM and Interscope and have their agents in a pre-prod environment. So as they're running performance tests, they do want to be able to monitor those pre-prod deployments as well. And so CA Lisa, as you create a virtual model of those services and the dependencies that you're mocking, you can also create test cases. And you can also run tests and also execute load tests and functional tests. And so for us, primarily, as Lisa is actually running load tests in a pre-prod environment, we want to have our agents sitting in those pre-prod environments and be able to pull not just monitor the performance aspects of the application, but also to be able to pull certain test events from CA Lisa. So now you can more adequately understand, hey, my performance of this particular backend web service is the average response time is shooting up, and this is actually, I also correlate that to a particular event, the test case, as more users are ramping up on the test itself. And if that is an actual relevant event, how do I drill down to the possible root cause in the application so that I can resolve those problems upfront earlier in the life cycle before I actually start to deploy these applications into production. So what we actually do here is Lisa, as tests are being run, they now publish test case metrics through an EP agent-like type of collector, and we send that data into the enterprise manager. So the enterprise manager now has your regular agent performance metrics together with the Lisa test metrics together all in a single view, so you can do various different things to triage and diagnose problems upfront early in the life cycle. You can also use that information to do capacity management. You can have a better understanding, if I have 50 users, this is how performance is going to be impacted on this particular box. If I ramp up to 100 users, what does this mean to performance, and what does that mean to the resources that I need on this particular box? So it gives you a better indication of how you want to manage this particular environment before you actually take this application and move it on to production. So this is a set of metrics that they do publish from Lisa to APM: responses per interval, response time, tests running, virtual users running, failed responses. So all of that stuff you can correlate together with metrics within APM to do the needful, if there are actual performance problems that you need to resolve up front early in the life cycle. So again, that was a whirlwind of what I wanted to talk about with the integrations with Cloud Monitor and CA Lisa. I think there's some opportunities for deeper dives in both of these different integrations. Before we end, I did want to bring up just a few other enhancements that were added to 9.1.1. We've added correlation and cross-process transaction tracing between Java and CTG. So, with CTG, if you don't have a SysView instance actually monitoring a mainframe, we can still stitch together Java to CTG. So from a CTG perspective, you can understand the round trip between CTG and the mainframe. Also, on the .NET Agent side, we now added HTTP tunneling, so it can connect to the EM over HTTP and HTTPS as well. Synthetic transaction identification. So this is on the back-end side on the interscope metric tree. So as synthetics are actually coming in, whether you're using WTG or you're using LoadRunner, we now have a means to configure the agent to distinguish between synthetic transactions and real user transactions. So another very interesting thing that you can use, especially in a pre-prod type of a scenario, or even in a production if you have WTG issuing synthetics into C. Also enhanced capabilities to provide better visibility to SQL queries if you're using Oracle RAC, and also higher historical metric limits. So we're actually at the top of the hour. I anticipated that this would go fairly long, and we did start several minutes late. Before I open it up for questions, I did want to mention, the last thing that was on my agenda was the upcoming notable patches. I talked a lot about the things that we added in terms of the features and enhancements to APM 9.1 and APM 9.1.1. I did wanted to just provide an update here that there are a couple patches that are coming out. One is APM 9.1.1.1. Some call it 9.111. It is targeted for availability in several weeks, at the end of August, and also APM 9.1.0.4, which is targeted for the end of September. So we do recommend, if you are looking at 9.1 or 9.1.1, that you do uptake these patches. It does contain some critical fixes that you should have in your environments before you actually do your upgrades. I know there's been some traffic on the community threads about certain issues that are affecting your deployments in 9.1. So there are patches coming out, and there will be an advisory that will be posted on support.ca.com. So if you have access to support.ca.com, there will be an advisory that's posted there to tell you about the symptoms of the problem and also the guidance for upgrading to these patches. And if you really need a workaround before you can upgrade to these patches, that particular advisory does detail a workaround as well. So I guess I'll go ahead and stop there. We are at the top of the hour, and so I'll open it up for questions.
I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask an audio question, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. And there are no questions at this time.
Okay. We can pause for another 30 seconds.
There is a question from Duke Energy.
Okay.
Yes, we have a question about, we understand there's a memory leak in 9.1.1, and
yes.
what the intent is on that and the time frame of getting that resolved.
Sure. Yeah, so this was the last slide that I showed with the upcoming patches is we are aware of those memory leak issues to the agent. So there are 2 patches coming out. There's a 9.1.1.1 patch coming out. Right now it's targeted for the end of August. So it's going to be available in a matter of weeks. And then if you're actually on 9.1.0, there is also a 9.1.04 coming out at the end of September. In the interim, if this is a real concern that's causing problems in your environment, there is a workaround that is detailed in a technical advisory that is posted on support.ca.com. And what I'll actually do too is I'll update the community thread for the PM technical advisory to point you to that advisory in support.ca.com. And it has details of the workaround to switch the agent to a quote-unquote legacy mode. So it's going to run basically in a 9.0 agent mode that doesn't exhibit the same behaviors. I hope that answers the question.
Well,
there are no further questions. There is now a question from Sanger Zeglada.
Question. I know there's a thread dump. Is there any plans to introduce memory dumps of Java?
That is an interesting question. I personally have not seen such an enhancement request, but I would like to hear more about that.
Because a lot of times what we see is basically we'll see a lot of heap consumption. And the only way, thread dump is not going to help you in the heap consumptions. And the only thing that is going to help you is a memory dump. And in this case, we'll take a JMap or something else.
Yeah.
So that's what I was wondering, because what I've seen in 9.1 as well as other releases is we're seeing that some of the memory is actually being taken up by Intrascope. And, that's the only fight we have, whether or not Intrascope is causing a problem or not, to look at what objects are in memory and how much they're consuming.
Yep. So one of the things that I would like to mention with respect to the, so right now we don't have immediate plans to actually do a full heap dump, but I think that's a great request. And I don't know if you guys heard of this new idea wall that we actually posted up, but this could be a great request to post on an idea wall. To kind of spur, other conversations about it. But one of the things that I did want to mention with what we're doing in our next release, APM Sierra, is we are going to introduce a concept of the agent sustainability metric. And so we will have an indication of the agent's CPU usage, the agent's memory usage, and the agent's response time overhead in the next release. So that gives some basic indication of, when compared to, how the application is performing, how much the agent's actually taking up. So that's one area of the enhancement that we're actually adding to APM Sierra. But there are no immediate plans right now for a full heap dump view of the memory usage.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
And there is a follow-up from Duke Energy.
Sure.
Yes, we were wondering, based on that memory leak and the fix, and you said the workaround took you back to 9.0, right? 9.01. We have to be at 1.1 for WebSphere support, WebSphere 8 support. So we have to wait on that fix, correct?
It's WebSphere, that's WAS 8?
WAS 8, yes.
Okay.
I know that's...
Let me double check with the engineering team here. So what it does is it takes you, the legacy mode takes you back to the 9.0 version of the agent from a technical perspective, like an architectural perspective.
Right.
Feature-wise, I don't believe it actually regresses in feature. So that's something that I'll have to double check.
And as far as that fix, is that just a quick upgrade? Does it require anything special? I mean,
it's going to be a full patch across both the EM and the agent. All our patches are, full uptakes of the patches.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And there are no further questions.
There's a question on the message board.
Sure, I'll take a look at that.
I mean on the Q&A.
Yeah, let me take a look at that right now. It's from Luis Hernandez. We've had version 9, and we've had a lot of problems with the Java agent to collect the database metrics. The problem is resolved in this version. I actually, that is, I'm not certain I understand the question. If you're talking about the SQL agent or if you're talking about other types of database metrics, or what the limitations are with the Java agent. So if you can expand on that a little bit, we can have some better visibility into the question. Otherwise, we can also have a follow-up, offline. Okay. All right. So are there any other questions?
There are no audio questions.
Okay. Well, very well. I know this session has been recorded. Again, thank you very much for everyone's attention. We do look forward to, getting back together with product management, perhaps kind of a deeper dive around Cloud Monitor and also with CA Lisa. I think those would be some very interesting topics going forward. But thank you again for taking time out of your day to attend this. I hope this was informational, if not educational. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
This will conclude